Thank you so much for coming. Sorry, I was just wasn't sure when I was supposed to start. Thank you for coming, and if you have not already seen what's going on in Cullinan Hall, you are, I think, in for a treat. This has been a terrific exhibition to work on. I think that you all will have a lot of fun touring the show. Before we get started into the content of it, I just wanted to talk to you all about some ground rules for your tours. So I've already mentioned to a couple of people who do school tours, which we know that this will be really popular. There's lots of touchable things, not only for school kids, but for adults. And so my advice with the school groups in particular is, rather than take them into the exhibition, is to seat them on the terrazzo in the front of the exhibition, where you can still perfectly see everything, or you could seat them on the side. But to try and I have a 9-year-old son, so I'm aware of small hands, but to try and tour them through that, especially the school groups, I think probably would not be the best idea. You'd spend all your time watching hands. So I would suggest that. With your regular adult tours, again, please just be vigilant about having people not touch things if they look like they are trying to do that. Also, we have a favor to ask. We are not expecting any of this, but should you be in the exhibition and you smell anything funny, please alert security. We have a lot of lamps that are electrified, and they're on transformers and they're plugged in. Again, we're not expecting any issue, but we would like you guys on your tours to be our front line in the same way that we're asking security to be our front line. So when in doubt, if you smell anything funny, just alert security and we will check it out. The other thing that I want you to know is, on the back wall of the pavilion, in the section of lighting, there is a motion detector. So you won't be losing your mind when you see there's a blue light object that will be in the dark until the motion detector is tripped. And then not only will it light up, but the center of it will start to spin and move. So just, again, something to be aware of as you're touring people through the exhibition. Otherwise, I think you're going to have a lot of fun. So what I am going to do today is take you through the sort of historical background, the general themes of the exhibition, and point out a significant number of objects, but know that each one of the platforms in the exhibition is really grouped around a theme. So if I haven't spoken about a particular object, but I've talked about the one next to it, you can share that same theme. We also have the catalog, which we should have copies in the Docent office already. If we don't, we will make sure that they are there. We also have chats on many of the labels, and we can make those available for printout copies for the Docent office also, if that's something that you guys would like. I also want to introduce Sarah Horn, who many of you may not know. Sarah's been with us for a year. She has worked on this exhibition. If you can't find me for any questions, Sarah is your next best bet. Okay, so start off, join me in Italy in 1966. Mid to the end of the 1960s, globally, was a time of real turmoil and transformation. A lot of countries had recovered in Europe from World War II, were entering a new phase of prosperity. into the 1950s and were building new cities and transforming their cities in terms of urbanism for working and for living. Italy was one of the countries that was going through rapid economic expansion, an economic boom. And so for students who entered architecture school and universities in the mid-60s to late 60s, this was a time when students were starting to grapple with issues that were facing society. And I think many of you are aware of 1968 being such an important year of protests worldwide in terms of workers' rights, and also we have a lot of war protests happening and governments are in chaos. In the midst of all of this, architecture students are creating their own kind of protest in which they are deeply concerned with issues of living in cities, the inequality of living conditions, not only for workers, but for all levels of society. They're concerned with rampant consumerism and a push for a certain kind of consumerism that's largely emanating from the United States and branding. They are interested in developing new languages of design, looking at new materials like plastics and foam. They're thinking about new ways of living for interiors, so not your formal living, but rather a more customizable, movable, colorful, low to the ground, casual living that would be well suited for young people. And so out of the architecture schools come a series of not only individual architects and designers, but collectives who have banded together to solve these problems of the world. And Florence is an epicenter in Italy for what is become known as the radical movement, which is kind of the label that encapsulates this period from loosely around 1965 to 1985. What's considered to be the very first expression of the radical movement is the Super Architectura exhibition that you're seeing a poster for it here, December 1966, and to the right is one of the rooms in the exhibition. It was in a small two-room gallery in Pistoia, Italy, which is just outside of Florence. It was meant to be in Florence, but in November 1966, there were catastrophic floods in Florence. And so the whole city was trying to work towards recovering from the floods. And two groups, Archizoom and Superstudio, mounted this exhibition, which included total environment, you see with the walls here, and floor and ceiling, and new furniture, what was supposed to be lighting, and objects that announced this firm break from what was known as Italian bel disegno, so good design, the solid, organic, beautiful Italian design, also using plastics and other new materials, but was more conventional modernism. So I hope you can see from the slide on the right that color is a huge part of this new language of design. New forms, so this as a lounge, fairly unlike anything that had come before. And what you see here actually at the time could only be realized in cardboard, but gets translated into a lighting device called Passiflora, which is in our exhibition. This tiny two-room exhibition had such an outsized influence. People came from all over the country, and then people came from other countries to see it. Most importantly, one of the owners of an important manufacturer named Poltronova, which was also based in Florence, came to see it and decided to support these student collectives and start to put some of the designs into production. Now, when we talk about collectives, I think today we often think about a group of people coming together, and each individual has their own special skill set that they specialize in, and therefore they play a certain role in the creation of an object. At this time, collectives were the flip side of that. So every single person worked together and came together as one voice in the design. It sounds incredibly chaotic to me, but at this point in time, there was this sort of monomania of a certain kind of theoretical and conceptual construct. And so you could have 5 people on the same page. And here is ArchiZoom, 6 of them, including the rare female designer at the time. They were based in Florence, came out of the Polytechnic school, and are one of the big names that are part of the radical design movement. There was another collective called UFO, or UFO to us, led by an architect named Lapo Benazzi, who was also at school with ArchiZoom. While ArchiZoom was trying to rethink form and a language of design that included color and texture and materials, Lapo Benazzi was taking a more subversive protest mode. He created these 2 lamps that are in the exhibition, which were direct criticism of consumerism by way of America. So you will see in the Paramount table lamp to the right, the volcano is taken directly from the icon of Paramount Movie Studios, and the MGM on the left also. You would have had your MGM lion here, but this is the symbol of MGM. And so with these lamps, he was making commentary about what was coming out of Hollywood and insisting on a certain kind of commercial promotion. These 2 lamps represent to me a kind of duality that you will find in a lot of objects in this exhibition. You have architects and designers who are anti-consumerist. They don't really care if anything is bought. They're not really caring if things are put into production. They see their objects as vehicles for communicating their ideas and messages. And yet, they made objects and they sold objects, and they were part of an ecosystem. Sometimes the ecosystem was affiliated with a manufacturer, so things did go into production and reach a wider audience. Sometimes, as if in the example of these lamps, every single one of them was individually ordered and handmade. So while these were designed in 1969, and we know our examples were made about 1972 to 1973, today you can still contact Lapo Benazzi and purchase one. He will make one for you. Out of these lamps, we're talking over a 40-year, 50-year span, there might be a dozen of each. So these works in the exhibition are exceedingly rare. There are a lot of prototypes and one-of-a-kind objects, and others that are like 1 of 3, maybe 1 of 5. It's a very small amount in which they were put into production. And when I say production, we're not talking about 1,000. We're not even talking about 500. We might be talking about 50. Because, as you will notice as we go through this aesthetic was not for everybody. It's not what you would call pretty. It was very, it was only for the most progressive institutions individuals, mostly who were within the arts and architecture community. There are works that are very much aligned with artistic movements. This is a prototype cube by Superstudio, another one of the Florentine collectives, in which this is laminate over plywood. Laminates being a new material that started to become very popular in use in the 1970s and then kind of explode in the 1980s. Superstudio, in terms of this, is very much looking at minimalism. They're looking at solowit. They're looking at geometric volumes like that made by Donald Judd. But they're thinking of these kind of incursions of a very ordered object or an ordered life within the landscape. And to reinforce that message, here's their advertising from the period. So you can see how these were, there were a lot of different objects in the line, if you will, and there's, in addition to our prototype cube, we have this table which went into production, which then called Quaderna instead of the prototype cube from the Missouri series. But here, I mean, look at this miserable child. I love these. The advertisements from the 60s and 70s are really terrific, and there's a utopianism that abounds within this field, and it's not a hippie utopia, but rather it is a utopia that's more based on how cities can become more livable. In terms of that, there were artists like Piero Gilardi, who's based in Torino, who was looking to create objects that would bring nature inside. So you have here on the left, Pave Puma, these tiles that are about 2 feet by 2 feet square. They can be hung on the wall. You can walk on them. You can see they're very naturalistic, as if it's pebbles with scattered leaves. And here, the rocks, there were 3 sizes of sort of ottomans or small seats, in which he is using a special coating that he developed called Guflock, which basically sealed in the polyurethane foam that creates the interior structure of this. So this is a time of experimentation and development of materials. These were made by Gouffram. They're a manufacturer, but I really think of them more as an atelier, because every single object, even though this might be molded, is actually then made by hand. So each one has a tremendous amount of handwork. This may have 5 or 6 different layers of Goufflock. So none of these pieces ever were sort of cookie cutter assembly line manufacturing. You can imagine that aesthetics such as these, and here you can see, the advertisement for the Sassi, and these are Piero Gilardi's larger nature carpets. They were incredibly advertised, and the images you would see, because they're so visual and they're really tactile. He was very much aligned with the Arte Povera movement coming out of Torino, and that's another theme that we'll explore in the exhibition, the connections between fine art and design. But these were never going to be super popular and seen in a lot of people's homes. The way that the radical movement and information about it was disseminated were through journals at the time. So we have a case in the exhibition where you can see treasures from the Hirsch Library, runs of Casabella magazine, In and Modo, that along with Domus, the 3 main architecture and design and urbanism journals in which designs, articles, theories, manifesto, etc. were published. Magazines like Casabella and Domus and Modo were distributed internationally. So while they did have small print runs, they were getting to the United States, they were getting to Europe, they were getting to Japan. This material was hugely influential and popular in Japan. We also have some really rare documents, such as Architectura Radicale, which is the published thesis of two architects, Paolo Navone and Bruno Orlandoni, which was one of the first sort of doctoral theses to codify this material or this period during the age. And then Global Tools here, which was like a super collective that all of these designers and architects, about 20 of them, gathered together and for 2 short years tried to start a series of workshops that would promote the ideas around the movement. So how to use humble materials and tools to create new agrarian societies, how to build housing, how to furnish objects, scientific research. It was a total movement. Global Tools sadly fails after 2 years because, like all super collectives, it dissolves because of infighting and such. And that's something important to know, that throughout the exhibition, we're talking about a series of, I don't know, there might be 20, 25 designers and collectives. They all knew each other. They were all part of the same orbit, but they were in competition with each other and not a race to, create something new. They were all going on their own paths, but rather there was a tension between them, and that is what happens when you have an incredibly prolific time over a very short period of years. There are also works in the exhibition and that were important to this historical background that have performative aspects to it, such as Alessandro Mendini's Monumentino da Casa. Mendini was not only an architect and designer, he was editor-in-chief of Casa Bella. He was based in Milan, where the publications were based. He was a unifier of sorts for this whole radical community. And as part of designing this piece, which for him was a spiritual object, he was very interested in the idea of monuments and what monuments mean in society. He created the original Monumentino da Casa, so the steps with the chair, and for a photo shoot that would then become on the cover of Casa Bella magazine, he burned it as a statement of kind of burning your history, burning relics, burning your monuments, as a way of signifying this break from the past. After burning this one, which completely disappeared, he made 3 others. One was also partially burned and is in pieces. One is the one here in our exhibition in Dennis Friedman's collection, and one we have in our own permanent collection. Oh, I should say one more thing. The other thing he was interested in about this object is that when you had it in your living room, if you sat on the chair and it was meant to be functional, all of these objects were meant to be functional. It may not have been their first concern in designing them, but they were all meant to be functional. If you're at that height, you are seeing your living space and the people in it from a completely different viewpoint. So it was also a way of challenging our normal spatial relations within our own home or within people when you're sitting and conversing together. In 1972, there was the first major exhibition in the United States and probably the 3rd or 4th major exhibition period of the radical material at MoMA. It was called Italy, the New Domestic Landscape. This is the cover of the catalog. The exhibition was divided into 2 sections, objects and environments. The objects, there were about 150 objects dating from the 1950s to 1972. Out of those, 180 objects. Out of those 180 objects, less than 20 were what we would consider to be radical. So, Ettore Sottsass, this is a neon tube asteroid lamp, radical. The Pratone, which we'll talk about, radical. The Pilola lamps, which we have in our collection, also radical. And yet you have this beautiful functional plastic, brightly colored side table, and here your modular plastic dinnerware, not radical. Poltronova, the manufacturer that I mentioned, was, as the main producer of radical objects, was well represented in the exhibition. And on the left-hand side, you see an advertisement that they took out in a lot of the magazine. Here are 3 of the objects in the exhibition that were in that, in the ad and in the show. So we have here Archizooms, Mies, armchair and footstool, Archizoom Sanremo lamp, and remember when I showed you that Super Architectura exhibition and I said there was cardboard cutouts that then became a lamp? Here is a prototype of that said lamp. By the time we get to the MoMA exhibition in 1972, for the most die-hard radicals of the bunch, that once it was kind of celebrated in a major museum, that was the end of the movement. For others, it continued on through Global Tools, and when Global Tools was finished in 1976, that was the end of the movement. But it really doesn't matter. Everybody has their personal opinion. What we know is that in 1976, a new collective was established in Milan called Studio Alchimia. And in 1979 and 1980, they had 2 major exhibitions called Bauhaus, which is a direct play on the Bauhaus, that greatest of all design schools and movements where form and function are so important as our industrial production. Studio Alchimia gathered together many of the radical designers and created this exhibition in which the objects presented a new language of design, one that was more aligned with postmodernism as it was emerging. You will see some of our earlier friends, the MGM lamp and the Paramount here. You will see in the exhibition the Svincolo lamp, which is here. Dennis Friedman collected numerous objects, the Capodanno, the lamp here, that were in this seminal exhibition. All of the pieces in this show, there were single objects made, all made by hand, even though there were industrial materials. You can see a very heavy reliance on the intersection of geometric shapes. We start to get those laminates that we were talking about earlier, references again to classicism, strange angles, and a riot of color. And this is the style. Here are 2 of the examples from Alchimia that are in the exhibition by Sottsass, who is right here. This is the style that goes directly into Memphis, and I think many of you probably know about the Memphis design movement, which was started in 1981. Here you can see the first collection where laminates, texture pattern, strong geometry, very postmodernist design come into play. What a lot of people don't realize is that before Memphis, there was Studio Alchimia. This is where the ideas and the language were developed. Alchimia was very conceptual. It was not a commercial enterprise. So if you wanted one of these objects, then you ordered it. There very well were only one of a lot of these objects made. Some, there were 2 or 3. a handful more, maybe there were 10. There's only one design here that went into pretty wide production, and by that, again, I mean maybe there were 50. But there was a split. And so Satori Sotsas here, wanted to translate those ideas into more commercial projects. And so he leaves to go on and found Memphis. And Memphis, of course, was the shot heard across the world in terms of design. And it got so much press, was active, the collective, between 1981 and 1988, was not commercially successful, but became very well known. And our exhibition just dips into the first couple of years of Memphis, and only with a couple of objects, which I'll show you in a moment, ones that are still really more aligned with the conceptual design language of studio alchemia. So we're staying in the very experimental, progressive side of it. Here are those two objects. We have Marco Zanini's Roma chair, and on the right, Andrea Bronzi's Magnolia bookcase. The bookcase, as far as we can tell, only 3 were ever made. Yes, these are fake plants, because again, if you're going to bring nature inside, you have to do it in kind of an ersatz postmodern way. And Zanini's molded fiberglass, sparkly throne, kind of commentary on a postmodernist version of a throne or a club chair, more of a historical model. Now, within that background, there are the themes that we will revisit and we will see as we go through the exhibition. So the idea of the collective with Archizoom and objects that communicate. So here's a very rare painted panel. There are not a lot of paintings associated with radical design. You can see it right back in here hanging on the wall. This is an image from the Polternova showroom around 1969, 1970. And here is the panel that shows a lot of the symbols, not only of Archizoom, but of the movement. So you have these lightning bolts, which are signs of dramatic transformation. Then you have symbols of communication through, at this point, radios as a way of, and the antennae, a way of signaling that ability of objects. You have your textural, pattern, which in the objects became more textural. You have your geometric abstraction here. And we have a platform which is populated solely by Archizoom and Super Studio works. So I showed you these two before. This is from their brochure from the period. The Mies stool and armchair is the only object in the exhibition that has been in continuous production since 1967. Everything else, there are works that I'll mention as we go along that are back in production, but otherwise many of them were made just for a few short years. Now, Archizoom in this chair, if you think about Mies van der Rohe, and just think about the geometry and international style architecture of our buildings here, but also if you know his tubular steel furniture. This is a direct kind of commentary because they were all about the anti-rational design, the anti-Bauhaus, but they're still using chromed steel. This seat is made out of rubber, and it was meant to be stretched this way so that you would look at it and think, is this functional? Is this even a chair? You'll see on ours, because it has been used, there's a bit of a sag, so you can see how it would bend. On our example, the pillow, as well as the pillow on the lit ottoman, are in horsehair, which is a nod to Le Corbusier, another great giant of international style, who often used horsehair for cushions on his iconic 1929 chaise longue. And then paired with it is Archizoom's San Remo lamp, also looking like a palm tree. You will notice that with all of the lighting in the exhibition, these are not lamps that you would read by, but rather they provided atmospheric light in your interior and were very symbol laden. I showed you earlier the pratone. There is a series of designs all made from this new polyurethane foam coated with goufflac, which were coming mostly with designers and collectives out of Torino, which is where the Gouffram factory is located just outside, which were deeply influenced by pop art. Pop art was first shown in Italy in 1964 in Venice. Every single one of the designers in this exhibition can recall seeing it for the first time. There were also galleries in Torino that specialized in American pop art. It was deeply influential. In terms of the furniture, what happens is you get this extremely large scale, oversized ideas. This is literally trying to bring a patch of grass inside. And when you see it, you will notice that the grass blades kind of come, they're about like 4.5 feet tall. And everyone wonders, how do you sit in it? So we have a nice picture of one of these advertisements. You can jump forward in it. You can just sit back in it. I have done so at the factory. It supports you. It's like you're sitting on a firm cloud. It is extraordinarily comfortable. This is the kind of seating that could go outside or inside, and multiple people can sit in it comfortably at the same time. You'll have to trust me on that. Studio 65 from Torino did a lot of these polyurethane foam and goufflac pop art inspired objects. But it's a mistake to think that they are just kind of funny or silly or what have you, because there's actually serious intent behind them. For example, with Capitale here, which you'll be shocked when you see how large it is in the exhibition, it is a lounge chair. The original ones, this is a period advertisement, were this kind of white and creamy white. This is color change over years. Our example, this is in production today. Our example is from the first years of production, and so it has oxidized is not the right word, but it has darkened over time because these materials are very light sensitive. In this design, Studio 65, Franco Adrito, the head of it, that collective, was actively challenging the myths of classicism. So yes, this is a column, the top of a column. There is a root of classicism in a lot of these objects, but it's challenging those long-held myths and saying, this is not, ancient history. This is not the revered history. This is something completely new, and we're going to use this symbol to create something new. Studio 65 also did the Cicocillo, I can never pronounce this name, the chair, for this boutique called Skin Up. There were 8 of these chairs that were made for a special commission. We have one in our collection. You can see here the boutique where you would sit and you could try on shoes. This boutique also sold handbags and other accessories, and it was the shop seating. They also designed this revolutionary set called Babylonia, and we have it displayed like this in the exhibition. This is also that same polyurethane foam with the goufflac. At the time, Franco and Nana Adrito had a small child, a daughter, and they wanted to create a type of activity, a toy, if you will, that she could engage with, that would inspire her and would relate to architecture. And so they created this building block system in which, as you can see, you can configure it in many different ways. It can go outside, it can go inside. They talked to a child psychologist about what kind of creativity was needed for children to be inspired, and came up with this great design which largely found its way into schools and libraries. There's also a series of designs that you'll see in the exhibition, and this Babylonia is also one of them. We talk about sort of customizable design, in which you are a participant and can rearrange as suits your needs from the time. Our maquette here, our model for the rumble sofa, which you see here on the right-hand side, was by Gianni Pettina, who's right here. This is his studio, and he was looking for a seating system for when his friends came over to the studio, in which it could be customizable. You could remove pieces. They could serve as benches, as pillows. It was expandable or contractible as you wanted it to be. And this went into production for a few years, also by Gouffran. And we have the handmade maquette prototype, and that's terry cloth towel. So truly a DIY handmade object. The same principle is here with Mario Bellini's Gilscacci tables, which, as you can see from the slide on the right, can be configured in a number of ways. They can be seating, they can be put together as a coffee table, you can move them, they're lightweight, any which way that you would like. There are a number of objects throughout the exhibition. There's one particular platform, and then you'll see the Fabio De Sanctis as you come up into the exhibition, which are objects designed by sculptors. Again, this kind of knitting together of different artistic communities. Gavina, another manufacturer, its leader, invited a number of artists and sculptors to create objects, including this bench, which was designed by Man Ray, also taking advantage of the new materials, and it is like a 5-foot-long bench that you'll see upstairs. Fabio De Sanctis, he and his partner in Studio Officino created only 3 of these cabinets. This is a slight outlier for the show because while it is from our period and it was done in Italy, it nods a bit more towards surrealism and fantasy furniture, as aligned with some of the pieces that are on the same platform with the Man Ray. This is a cabinet sort of done like a proper 18th century cabinet. These are 2 car doors from the Fiat 600 series. And notice the hairy paw feet. For those of you who ever docent at Bayou Bend or Rienzi, you will remember that the hairy paw, claw and ball feet are a hallmark of 18th and earlier century furniture. Here are 2 more pieces that are on that same platform. Marianne Baruch, also a sculptor from that period. This is her Ron chair, which is a large polyurethane foam ball that you can sit on, covered in a synthetic sort of fur upholstery. And on the right-hand side, Studio Tetrarch's tablecloth coffee table. This is early days with molded fiberglass, and the amount of kind of rhythm of the drapery that they are able to get, that kind of trompe-l'oeil vision, is really extraordinary. There is also a platform that has a series of objects that go back to that alignment with arte povera, the use of very humble materials like wood, very simple forms that often have interactive or performative aspects. This is Urano Palma, the table which was featured on the cover of this issue of Domus magazine, in which the artist created the table form, partially drilled all of these holes into its surface, and then inserted woodworms and let the woodworms do their digging to create these holes. And he recorded the sound of the woodworms eating away. Unfortunately, the recording is lost, but there's a detail of the top. And so this is part of that arte povera spirit, and is an incredible, there was a suite of furniture that he did like this. We have the table, and there's the man himself. We have this armchair also upstairs in the exhibition. Again, that kind of wacky nod to classicism. I love the fact that for the photo shoot, he drags his furniture into the main park in Milan to set it up, and why not have a sort of outdoor party with it? There's also a settee for this suite. Two other chairs that also fall into the same spirit: Ugo Morano's San Picasso chair and Riccardo Delisi's armchair. There's only two made of each of these. Delisi was based in Naples, so he's a little bit geographically outside of the main centers of Milan, Florence, and Torino. He was known for his work with impoverished communities, particularly children, in which he would go into neighborhoods, have the children gather, whether it was sticks or stones or other natural materials, and build sculptures, build furniture, all in kind of an ephemeral way to help give them opportunities to think about their environment and objects in a different way. This chair is very humbly made out of painted wood, and you can see here also with the San Picasso chair, very simple elemental chair. One of my favorite projects in the exhibition is Ugo La Pietra's Archangel Metropolitan lamp. You see again the man himself in 1977. He was an architect, a designer, a theorist, a publisher, a writer, a performance artist. And what he did, here he is in the Milan subway. These poles that you see here were used to hold advertising posters in the Milan subways, or placards. He went and he basically stole about 20 of them, brought them back to his studio, and affixed not only neon lights here or with the halo here, but hand-painted plexiglass panels, either in this shape, of which we know about 3 of them right now, or in this angel shape, and then he put them back into the subway, as you can see him doing here, or elsewhere around Milan, and watched what happened, and saw how people interacted with them, how it dovetailed with urban life. Very few of them survive. Most of them were destroyed at the time. The one here in our exhibition is one of those original ones. About 10 years ago, he did a new series of them. So if you Googled it, and you can see ones that are much more fanciful and brightly shaped, and those are all from the 2000s, but ours is from the original. I mentioned lighting because there is a lot of lighting in the exhibition. And you'll see the back wall of the show is pretty much dedicated to lighting. Again, small handmade production. This lamp by Fulvio Ferrari, this is the hubcap from a Volkswagen Beetle with a very simple light bulb. A new twist on the ready-made. The Angolo lamp here actually leans up against the wall, so it becomes part of the architecture. Gianfranco Fini's lamp here, the Quanta, very simple geometric abstraction. We have lit as many of the lamps that we can safely do. And by that I mean some of the lamps still have their original light bulbs that are irreplaceable. And so we have chosen not to light those because it's not a great idea to do that over the time of the exhibition. Some of them are displayed on tables in such a way that there's not a possibility to actually get the cords underneath and into the floor. Know that the lights are on timers, so they are on when the museum is open. If any of you, for any reason, are scheduling or have a tour, a special event that is after hours, I would ask you to let the Docent office know, and they will talk to Deborah Roldan's office, exhibitions, who will program the lights to make sure that they are on when you'll be touring. I doubt that this will happen for you all, but know that they are on timers for when the museum is open. Here are two other lamps in the exhibition, our collective super studio, using the new plastics and bakelite. This is a movable series of shapes so that it can be, you can have openings here in the center. It can stand all upright and vertical like this or be spread out. Livio Castiglione and Gianfranco Frattini's Bolam lamp, name coming from boa constrictor and lumi for light in Italian. This design is still in production by Artimidi. Ours is an early example. It is a series of about 6-foot-long sections that can be screwed together. You can bundle it as sort of a light sculpture, as we have upstairs. You could hang it from the ceiling. You could make it stair step down steps. The name and I already told you about the name. The design is based on the fact that the two designers were having some drinks poolside and saw that hose, the pool cleaning hose, kind of making its way through the water, and that inspired the design of this lamp. These two are very iconic for that period. As we get into the Studio Alchemia pieces and we start to get in a more postmodernist language, the last two platforms to the west side of the exhibition have a series of these groups of objects. You start to see that new language of design in terms of a new color palette, the rhythm of geometric shapes and patterns. This Spaziale chair, incredibly rare, one of 6 that was made in addition to a table. Alessandro Mendini based its form on the lunar landing module. So that's why the feet are shaped like this. And then the lacquered seat has a topographical image of the Earth as seen from the moon. Really a special piece. And then 2 other works from those platforms, Alessandro Mendini's Celedonia armchair. This was originally designed in 1978 as the Proust armchair, which was the same form. It had a white canvas fabric seat that was hand-painted in a dot, kind of pointillist manner in bright colors. He later used the same form here. He was thinking more about using fabric to create almost like a bronze version of it. And then Ettore Sottsass's table monument, which is just that. It is a monument for the table. It has no other function. It's not a fruit bowl, but it is like an architectural sculpture, also from that Bauhaus exhibition, but here again you see the use of laminates and geometry. I'm going to wind up with giving you the background on the exhibition design. So you will have noticed we have built a special pavilion. It is based on an unrealized design from 1969 by the collective Archizoom and Andrea Bronzi, one of the members, called No Stop City. And No Stop City was a conceptual project existing mostly of drawings and watercolors and some models. You can see here through the 2 examples, it was all based on this kind of utopian ideal of an infinite city, one which had no fixed boundaries, one in which agrarian culture would merge with urban culture, and we would all live in harmony. The interiors, these are the unrealized models that they use, where they were showing how domestic objects and sculpture could work in this infinity-like interior. So this is what we based it on. So you'll see the mirrored columns, the open spaces, the mirrored room. We have an open grid seating, a ceiling, excuse me. So this is what our pavilion looks like, and it was designed for us by two young architects out of Brooklyn, New York, called Almost Studio. They have been here right now for the opening, and the whole idea of putting an ArchiZoom model in a Mies pavilion is an incredibly subversive act, because everything that ArchiZoom was thinking about and doing was kind of against Mies's rationalism. So what's so wonderful about the exhibition design is that we have a pavilion structure that is giving the idea of, from a theoretical perspective, of how those objects were intended to be experienced on the basis of ArchiZoom's design. So it's this wonderful, not only is it a great visual setting, but it is also like a historically accurate setting. I will say, for your guests, when you first walk into the pavilion, the mirrored plexi walls, you get a lot of funhouse distortion. Just be careful of people walking back and walking into a platform. We know people are going to take lots of selfies. Photography is absolutely welcome. We just are hoping people don't kiss the walls a lot. So keep your eye out on that. And then finally, and I should have done this in the very beginning, but who is Dennis Friedman? I should have started with that. Dennis Friedman is our collector. He's based in New York. He was the founding creative director of Fairchild Magazine, so W Magazine, for example. He created their entire look, did for 20 years, all their visual design, all their creative shoots. He left Fairchild Magazine and became the creative director of Barney's New York. Now he is working not only as creative consultant for Surface Magazine, for the designer Martin Margiela. He's designing books. He's recognized as one of the top collectors in the world of Italian radical design. He also collects contemporary art and other design as well. He has been building this collection for about 20 years, and he always sought out the rarest, earliest examples, prototypes, small, limited edition, early examples. His first purchase was the Capitello, and it set him on this journey. He is tremendously knowledgeable. He has a huge library. He always talks about himself as being part archaeologist, part collector. And he was collecting this material in a time when really no one was collecting it in the United States. This is not the kind of design, sadly, but hopefully that will be changing, that you can see in museums in America. MoMA has a couple of pieces. We were collecting this because it's been a passion of mine for a long time. But we now have, with the gift and acquisition of his collection, we have, next to the Centre Pompidou in Paris, we have the definitive collection of Italian radical design in the world, and definitely the most significant collection in the United States. So we know that people are coming from all over the country to see this exhibition because you cannot see this material. Dennis made a very generous gift to the museum. Out of the 66 pieces that are in the exhibition, 21 were gifts from Dennis. We acquired another 24 of the objects. So you'll see that throughout the credit lines. Each one has a terrific story. For those of you who've been seeing some of the press, and we've done stuff on our Instagram. I think we had 3 questions for Dennis Friedman on one of our MFA websites. He talks about some of the objects and why he was acquiring them, and we have great stories about that. But as a totality, through this exhibition, our visitors will be getting a very comprehensive introduction to this very important movement in design history, one that had outsized influence, one that is back in vogue 50 years later, because so many of the same concerns are present today. So thinking about inequality within our cities and housing issues, thinking about the environment, thinking about consumerism and its effects. These are issues that are still facing society and designers and architects today. So there has been a resurgence of interest in this movement 50 years on. I will just end by saying that I find the objects and the exhibition incredibly joyous. I hope you will too. I hope our visitors will. My hope is that just visually, people will get a sense of the materials, the new kinds of forms and scale and design language that is part of this movement. And then through your guidance, they will learn more about the period, some of the key ideas. It's not the individual names that are as important, I feel, for our general public, but rather the ideas that we've outlined today. And as I said, if there are objects that you want to include on your tours that are on the same platform with ones we've talked about today, there's similar ideas that the individual platform groupings are arranged so that you can customize your own tours and respond to guests' questions as you go along using the same larger umbrella ideas. And that is the end. So I will invite you, I think there's time to go up and see the exhibition for those of you who have time. Sarah and I will come up and join you up there, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.